in the last few weeks. Sarah Attia is the wife of, the Canadian wife of Khaled Al-Qazzaz, the person who was detained in Egypt and remains detained in Egypt. With no further ado, I'm going to ask Sarah to come and say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here today to share with you my family's ordeal, a story that is one among thousands of horrific stories, but unique in its own way. A story of injustice, oppression, fear, and tyranny, but also a story of hope and optimism for the future. I apologize in advance for those who have heard my story before, but I will continue to say it until Khaled comes home. My name is Sarah. I was born in Mississauga and grew up in a wonderful neighborhood just outside of Toronto. I am the mother of 4 Canadian children. Abdurrahman is 8, Amina is 6, Fatima is 4.5, and Tahrir, our little one, who we named after Tahrir Square, is 2. She was our little symbol of freedom, liberation, and hope for democracy. I am the wife of Khaled Al-Qazzaz, my husband, who has been unjustly detained in Cairo's worst prison. Today marks 329 days. I am not a politician. I'm not even married to one. My children and I, our family, are survivors and an eyewitness of the bloody military coup in Egypt. Khaled and I met while we were both students at the University of Toronto. Khaled was an activist and an advocate for human rights, and he had huge dreams. He dreamed of a better a better world for all humanity. He started a group on campus back at the University of Toronto 10 years ago called Students for World Justice. He also founded an orphan sponsorship program that's been running for 10 years now. He left an imprint on all those who met him, and he was like a sponge as he absorbed concepts of principles of freedom, democracy, and tolerance that were so foreign to that day Egyptian society. I'm here today to allow you to see a contrast between the country that my husband Khaled worked so hard to build and today. After we got married, we decided to go to Egypt to begin a project in education. We founded a school together that provided Egyptian children with quality education. We introduced our students to concepts of volunteerism, community, and individual rights, human rights. In 2011, Khaled, like many Egyptian young men and women, had become increasingly frustrated in Egypt, and on January 25th, he was among the first ones in Tahrir Square. He spent the 18 days there until Mubarak was ousted. The world stood watching, and as Hilary described, the world cheered, and everyone regained hope in the future. Khaled was extremely excited about the opportunity for democracy in Egypt. He was young, just 32 at the time, full of energy, and jumped on the chance to make a difference. He joined the presidential campaign for Dr. Morsi and was part of the media team, and he did a very good job at what he did. They won the first free democratic elections in Egypt, and the world celebrated. Khaled was appointed as part of the presidential team staff. He worked on files of foreign affairs, human rights, and he was working on a big file on women empowerment. And he worked very hard. For 1 year, my children and I watched as Khaled spent over 15-hour days working hard to overcome the years of corruption to build a democratic Egypt. He had dreams. Joe Stork, the Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch, had this to say about Khaled. And he says, I met Khaled along with other presidential aides. Khaled was the go-to person when we wanted to raise issues about developing new important legislation on things like the rights of NGOs to organize and operate without government micromanagement. He was trying to change things. This is what Mr. Stork had to say. This is what Khaled was doing for stability in Egypt. On July 3rd, 2013, this all came to an end. On that day of the military coup, which happened to be Khaled's 34th birthday, we lost contact with him. My husband, the president, and 8 other aides disappeared. We spent almost 2 months not knowing anything about them, except a few phone calls that told us he was alive. My children asked me what happened to their father and why he wasn't coming home. Their eyes were full of sadness and confusion as they remembered their father and how he was telling them that he was fixing Egypt. I struggled to look back into their eyes and explain to them the concepts of injustice, oppression, and evil. I struggle till today to explain to their little spirits and not let them lose hope in humanity. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International both documented Khaled's case as a detainment as enforced disappearance, and they called it incommunicado. The United Nations Human Rights Council concluded in a working paper that the detainment was unlawful and Khaled should be released immediately. He remained in this state for 5 months. On December 17th, Khaled was moved to the maximum security facility in Cairo of Torah prison called Scorpion. At least now we were part of the legal system. He was a number. When he was initially moved to Torah, those were the scariest days of my life. I had no idea where he was, what was being done to him, and what would happen to him. When I finally heard from him 3 weeks later, I received a torn piece of paper bag that described the horrible conditions that he was subjected to. He described how he was handcuffed, blindfolded, and led at gunpoint from the Republican Guard building where he had been held for 5 months and taken to the maximum security facility in Torah, to a solitary confinement cell that he refers to as the grave. That's about 2 meters by 2 meters. It has no windows to outside light. There is a very small opening facing the hallway that causes cold waves to come in during the winter and insects to come into the cell. The cell includes a non-functioning toilet and a sink, nothing else. Khaled spent the first 21 days in 24-hour solitary confinement with nothing except the concrete floor and a toilet. He was, just imagine, he had nothing, no change of clothes, nothing, no human interaction, nothing. It has been 329 days. Due to the horrific conditions, my husband's health is deteriorating quickly. The poor sleeping conditions have resulted in Khaled developing an issue with the nerves in his neck. The medical condition has worsened, resulting in loss of mobility in his left arm. During my visits, when I was able to visit him a few months later, I have realized the effect of the torture of solitary confinement has had on him. I have observed a change in his ability to focus, short attention span, a difference in his concentration and memory. He complains of dizziness, headaches, and problems with sleeping. When I first saw him after the first long period of solitary, I observed a change in his skin color and complexion. This is how it started, and the last 5 months have not been much better. Prison visits are few and inconsistent and from behind a glass window. My children had no physical contact with their father. He is not able to hug them or kiss them. After some pressure through human rights organization, I was able to have my children hug their father for a few seconds in the last visit before we left Cairo. Tahrir is almost 2. She learned to crawl, walk, talk, and now run, and her father saw none of that. When she saw him for the first time after the long disappearance, she did not recognize him and she refused to go to him. It was heartbreaking for all of us. For the last 329 days, I have witnessed tragedy after tragedy. News of deaths of friends, imprisonment, harassment, corruption, lies, threats, and the list goes on. Our family has been subjected to continuous targeting. Khaled's elderly father has been imprisoned without charge for no reason. Our lives have been torn apart. And we are just one example of what Egypt is going on now. In my waits in prison lines at Torah, I have met families who have suffered horrific injustices. I have seen boys, young boys, wearing prison suits and in adult prisons. I have seen men in wheelchairs being taken from one jail to the other. I know personally many women who have been incarcerated for no reason except joining a protest or being related to an imprisoned person. I know personally women who have been subjected to the virginity test, and the list goes on. Khaled has been held without charge, I must say, for the last 320 days. The Egyptian legal system allows for the prosecution to renew detainment time after time after time for up to 5 months. He was seen by a judge last week for the first time. The judge listened to him and his lawyer, and without giving any explanation, he renewed once again for 45 days, without charge, without reason, without any end in sight. I ask my Canadian community, my Canadian family, what crime has my family done to be ignored? What crime have my children done to suffer like this? What crime has Egypt done to be left in suffering, oppression, and be forgotten? What crime has Khaled done, my husband? Is he being punished for working so hard for human rights, dreaming of democracy in Egypt and a better world? Although several MPs have expressed support, and Minister Baird is aware of my situation, our situation, and brought it up to his Egyptian counterparts, and I'm grateful for that, Khaled has not come home yet. I know for a fact that it will be impossible for Khaled to be treated in a fair manner consistent with international standards. I'm calling on our Canadian government to recognize the human rights violations and speak up on the lack of due process taking place in Egypt, which Canada is considering as a bilateral partner. I will close off this message. I will close off with a message that I received yesterday. Yesterday, the first day of the elections, myself and many others who have suffered so much, as we watch the world accept this loss of freedom and democracy and celebrate it, we felt a sense of despair, and I received this message of hope. They can arrest our bodies, but they cannot arrest our dreams, hearts, and souls. Nothing lasts forever. It will be over soon, and we will use this history, this experience, this blessing in disguise, with all its pains and sorrows to our favor, God willing. Khaled Al-Qazzaz, Scorpion Maximum Security Facility, May 2014. Thank you.